Hi, I'm Mike Brofman, and welcome to another season of Song and Wine, Brooklyn Art Song Society's web series where we discuss our upcoming concerts over a bottle of wine. I am joined by baritone Michael Kelly.
Hello.
And we are discussing opening night of our home series. This concert features music inspired by the Roma people, who are otherwise known as the Gypsy people. But before I go any further, I want to thank our wine sponsor, Waterfront Wines. They are located at 360 Furman Street, and they focus on organic and all-natural wines. So why don't we see what they've given us tonight?
Right.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's very nice.
It's very good. It's very good.
That is good. We're drinking a German, apparently it's a Sauvignon Blanc,
Yeah.
which is uncommon.
So, for our program, we're doing several song cycles, all in German. It's Zigeuner. So we are doing Antonin Dvorak's Zigeuner Melodien, Opus
Indeed.
55. I honestly didn't know this piece before that all that well, and I just chose all the famous Zigeuner Melodien.
It's certainly one of the most
Yeah.
famous out there, I'd say.
We're also doing songs by Franz Liszt and Johannes Brahms, and we're doing violin works by Ravel and Sarasate. So there's actually a very eclectic mix on this program.
Sure.
But our work is Dvorak. So my first question for you is, what is your favorite of these 7 songs?
Oh, that's kind of a hard question, actually. They're pretty wonderful, all of them, and eclectic, actually. And they take you through quite a journey of the conceptualization of what Gypsy life is like and what the philosophy of Gypsy life was like. Probably my favorite is the third one, though, which to me is actually the most Brahmsian.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has this gorgeous long line and sort of arpeggiated accompaniment that just sounds very different than any of the others. And I love it for that reason, but I also dislike it the most for that reason because it doesn't sound as much like Dvorak as the rest of them.
Yeah, Dvorak was very influenced by Brahms.
Yes.
And Brahms was an early champion. I think Brahms hooked up Dvorak with his publisher Simrock,
Right.
and that was his big break, which is actually why, even though these songs, the original texts are in Czech, they were first performed in German,
Right.
and we are
Yeah.
performing them in German
Yes.
to keep consistent with the other songs on the program. Also because I think that there's a certain distance that I wanted to maintain of the poetry, which is not actually ever by an actual Romani person.
Right.
So my favorite song, I think, is the opening song, Mein Lieder Tont, if you do the German title.
Yeah. We're not going to try the Czech today.
But I think, one, it sort of feels like a sort of Gypsy manifesto in a lot of ways, this sort of capturing the essence. And I think one of the things that I think Dvorak does in a lot of these songs is they have these sort of, I call them sort of circular structures where if he wanted to, he could just continue the song almost indefinitely.
Sure.
The way the form of the pieces, you know, it has an opening and then a verse and then it comes back to the opening and then a verse and then it ends with the opening and it could just as well go on to another verse. And this song in particular is about this sort of eternal longing that the Gypsy people have, that they are these people who are missing a homeland that doesn't even exist. And so, and it particularly uses that feeling that the song could just go on forever in the same way that their sort of longing just goes on forever. It's a very 19th century romantic
Well,
idea.
Yeah. we love our melancholy from that era, which I think is captured so beautifully by Dvorak. You know, he has these sort of exciting, colorful moments in the piano that sound almost like bells, which you associate a lot with clothing that the gypsies wore during that time, that were very sort of an instrument-like. You know, they were cymbals all over, and they carried drums with them a lot. You know, so I think you hear that a lot in the music, and maybe it's derivative, maybe it's more specific than we could ever possibly know.
Yeah.
But I just love the way he captures sort of this spirit of the people as both exuberant and loving their life, but also recognizing the difficulties of it at the same time. So he'll go in between major and minor a lot within each song, which is very beautiful.
And this is a good segue into the second question, but one does wonder how much the way Roma life is presented in these songs is a Western projection of taking sort of, you know, romantic 19th century tropes and just sort of making and so I think that it is something worth talking about. I think the idea of when we're performing this music that's so sort of about an ethnicity that kind of has no real say in how they're being presented.
Well, it's not unlike how French composers in the early 1900s were treating Asian concepts and sounds, and the sound of the gamelan from the World's Fair.
Exactly, sort of exoticism.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we do have to, since we are in a more, let's say, woke age, we have to think a little bit about what value there is in this music that we can glean while still sort of acknowledging that maybe some of it's not the most forward-thinking attitudes on race and minorities. And what can you take away from this music, and what should you maybe acknowledge as a product of its time?
Well, I think it's a bit of a snapshot for sure, right? I think it is. It's identifying the way a European person saw this community, which is, I think, important. Just like we see other ethnicities now is going to be looked at and studied and talked about for a long time as well, because we have a lot of conflict concerning it right now. But and I'm sure there was a lot of conflict back then between the two communities and the fascination between them as well, which I think we're still dealing with now. There's a fascination, a fear, and also a curiosity. Yeah, so.
I do think that, you know, to me, all this Roma gypsy music is about the other. It's about being an other, and you think you can extract a sort of universal idea of what it's like to be an outsider, what it's like to not belong, what it's like. And then you can kind of say some of the racial undertones and stereotyping is a product of the time. I think all art, no matter how aware it is, has an element that's universal, that's timeless, and has an element that's completely just a product of its time.
Sure.
You know, and you just have to, you can't separate the two, because that's just that, and you have to just be conscious of what parts of it are not as enlightened as others, because we're always evolving culturally, we're always becoming more sensitive and more inclusive, and that's, I think, ultimately a good thing, that the arc of cultural history is more inclusiveness, more diversity, more voices being heard, not less. And
being more specific with the terms that you use to identify these cultures.
And so any stop on that, you know, ride over history is going to be a work in process.
Sure.
But I also think that at the end of the day, this music was written with a sense of admiration and a sense of respect. I don't think it was written to mock them. No. It was not written to sort of use them as as a clown-like caricature to be laughed at. I think there was a deep admiration, and maybe there was a misunderstanding because of cultural differences.
Could be.
But it was always done almost, and sometimes in a sense of envy of like, I don't, I think like a composer like Brahms sort of felt very, like didn't want to have to be in high society, did not comfortable being socializing.
Sure.
And kind of wanted to be an outsider and was sort of liked the idea of someone who could just be that by choice. And he didn't feel, he felt constricted in that way.
The human being animal that you inevitably cultivate through cultural mindset and evolution of thought and philosophy is not necessarily who we are at a base level. And I think that gypsies potentially we're looking more at the basic necessities of life, which is a beautiful thing, right? You don't necessarily need this overwrought sense of self that is, sort of put upon you based on all of the things that have happened before you. It's more about connecting with who you are in the moment, connecting with nature, connecting with music, and dance and movement and all of these things that I think humans have been experimenting with and looking at since the dawn of time.
Yeah, I think there is an emphasis in all the concerts we're doing this season, which is a lot about folk music, a lot about national origin, of getting back to something primal. That there was a sense that as modernity was sort of chugging along, people were losing part of their humanity and then thinking about how they can get it back. And that's why composers like Bartok, went out into the countryside and they saw this nationalism not as the way we now see it, as a sort of isolationist, as a sort of way of sort of being in a tribe. They saw it as trying to get at something universal. And there was a sense that gypsy music or the Roma music got at something primal and universal that was valuable. And that's, I think, ultimately why these composers wrote in this idiom. To switch gears to our third question, you just literally this morning got back from a stint doing an opera As One, which deals with the trans community and generally about marginalized, in the broadest sense, a marginalized community. And so I wanted to know your thoughts on what, after we've talked about gypsies and all of this, or the Roma people and all of this, what do you think music has to offer to marginalized communities? What do you think it can say that you can't just say in a treatise or in a meme?
Yeah. I have to say this is a very sort of stereotypical thing to say, which is that music is universal, which it is. It's a language that everyone can connect through, and I think for a topic that is as controversial as transgender rights and just the community at large is and can be, it's very triggering for a lot of people. I think the language, using the language of music, and particularly opera, which is this, tried and true art form that maybe modern audiences either do or do not connect with, but is a medium that is so old that when you put a concept that's so new on top of it, I think it has a way of neutralizing the argument within the piece.
No, I think you brought it back beautifully to our piece and just music in general, that I don't think personally music makes political points particularly well, because political points are finite. And I think there's a certain abstraction that's inevitable in music. But I think what music does is it humanizes. It's a language that's sort of, to me, inherently emotive, even when it's cold. That's an emotion in and of itself. And showing that I think that there's just a basic foundational commonality in how humans experience emotion that's universal, that everyone in its primal essence just has. And by showing that someone who's marginalized, someone who's oppressed, someone who has an experience that's painful like that has emotions that you have too, I don't think anyone in good conscience could see that and not sympathize and not relate to it. So that's a good place for us to segue before I run out of wine.
Right.
Opening night is Friday, October 4th at the Brooklyn Historical Society. The first installment of our home series. Michael will be singing, Kristen Gornstein mezzo, Tammy Petty soprano, Yuri Sukiyama on piano, and myself. Tickets are on sale at our brand new website, www.brooklynartsongsociety.org. Check it out. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.